It's my immense pleasure to introduce this afternoon Don Stevens, Chief of the Nulhegan Band of the Coosuk Abenaki Nation. He's an award-winning leader, businessman, writer, and lecturer. He's been featured in magazines, books, TV shows, and documentaries. Don was appointed to the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs by Governor Douglas in 2006 for 2 terms where he served as chair. He has led the fight to obtain legal recognition for the Abenaki people in Vermont. He was able to acquire tribal land for the Nulhegan tribe, which had been absent for over 200 years. He has over 26 years of experience in successfully developing information technology, logistics, and manufacturing strategies for multi-million-dollar companies. He proudly served in the U.S. Army and graduated from Champlain College with a degree in computer information systems. And most importantly, Don is my brother-in-law, the lucky guy. Welcome, Don. Thanks for joining us today.
I was going to say, Barbara, that's all you really had to say. Is that,
I know.
This is my brother-in-law. And lucky to have her as family, for sure. When Barb asked me to come on, I said, of course, we're family. Of course, I'd come on, and we have a lot of people interested in Native things now, and a lot of people don't know about our culture. So I'm very happy to be able to help bring some light on who we are and the lay of the land. So first off, I think I'll start out with just letting you know who we are, where we're located. So a lot of people know the St. Francis Sakoki Band of Missisquoi, which kind of go from Upper Burlington all the way up through Grand Isle, Swanton, Alberg, into lower parts of Canada. So they're pretty much the turtle people because they're on the side of the Lake Champlain. That used to be one of the first Jesuit missions in Vermont. So it was kind of a mission town where a lot of refugees came from down south, like Greylock, who was actually Petumtuck. He's got a big statue in Battery Park in Burlington. He basically went up to get warriors from Missisquoi to help with the raids on Deerfield, which was his homeland, where a lot of Europeans were pushing them out of their homelands. So that's Missisquoi. They're one of the larger tribes in Vermont. Then there's my tribe, Nulhegan, which goes from about Richford all the way over to Moosehead Lake in Maine, down New Hampshire to about Turner's Falls, Mass. But if we're just talking Vermont, we basically go over to the New Hampshire border down to about Orange County. And then we head west over to Burlington and down to about Rutland. That's kind of our traditional homelands. Then you have the Coosuk of the Coos Meadows, which is in Newberry Haverhill, kind of splits Vermont, New Hampshire. There was that was where the oldest mission in Vermont was, to catch people coming up the Connecticut River. So the Jesuits would catch people coming up the Connecticut and try to Christianize them. And there was a little mission village there for trade. And I think it was back in the 1700s, it was called Mission de Loups, which means Mission of the Wolves. And Coosuk means pine, so people of the pines, that's what Coosuk means. So the tribe that's in your area is the El-Nu tribe, which means people. El-Nu means people. Or El-Nomba means human beings, but El-Nu means people. They're based out of Jamaica, and they're in the southern part of the state, so Bennington, Brattleboro, that kind of area. And they're only about 75 people. They do a lot of living history. So you'll see them, some people call it reenactment, we call it living history. So they do pre-contact stuff or French and Indian War type stuff. So they go to Fort Ticonderoga. They do all the kind of early stuff. And the Coosuk of the Coos deal with mostly ethnobotany, which they're about 150 people, maybe. They're just, like I said, they're just in Orange County. Nulhegan, our tribe, means if Native people were referencing us today, they would say the place of the wooden traps who live in the pines who see the first light of day. So Nulhegan means basically wooden trap or deadfall trap, which is up on the Nulhegan River and the Nulhegan Basin. If anybody knows where the Northeast Kingdom is, that was primarily our territory, the Northeast Kingdom. And like I said, Coosuk means pine and Abenaki means first light of the day or dawn land. And Missisquoi is known as place of the flint. So if you were talking about Missisquoi, it'd be the people where the place of the flint is, who see the first light of day. So Nulhegan's probably 1,500 to 2,000 citizens I'm responsible for. And Missisquoi is similar. So there's probably somewhere around 4,000 Abenaki people on tribal rolls in Vermont, 4,000 to 5,000, and there could be more. Now that's the tribal makeup or the territory of Vermont, right? The geographical locations. But historically, we're nomadic people. So in the winter, we would stay in the pines and we would live in longhouses, and there'd be family units or bands. That's why you see Nulhegan Band of the Coosuk Abenaki Nation, because we lived in family bands. And I don't know if the way you might visualize tribal councils, right? You have a government with a chief and you have tribal council, and then you have citizens underneath that. Well, in the old days, the head of each family would represent their family at this reunion or this governmental council. And you would speak on behalf of your family, whoever the person for your family was chosen that they respected. And if you didn't like what they were saying, you could get up and leave, take your family with you. Or you could stay and talk about, we'd have these a couple times a year around harvest and sometimes in the spring, where you'd come together and you'd talk about marriages, you'd talk about conflicts, you would talk about where on the rivers or lakes families should be located, because you didn't want to use up all the resources, right? So people were assigned different places throughout our territory, so that way they could manage those resources. And if somebody got married, then they'd pick another spot on the rivers or the lakes where they could be assigned to be stewards of that place, so it could provide for them. So that's kind of the makeup. And they elect a chief like myself to represent them in their wishes. So realistically, the government or the band of council people are our legislative body. So they kind of tell the direction that we go in. And if there's a war, they'd elect a war chief, and then that war chief would take military tactics. And when the war was done, they would be reabsorbed back into the community. Same thing with me as chief. I would be elected to work on a state government and local level. And I'm not sure if I don't know if there's a way to pin me on this or not. I'm seeing a couch cushion most of the time. I don't know what you guys are seeing. Maybe you're seeing me, but I'm looking at a couch cushion most of the time.
No, we're seeing you with the lake in the background.
Perfect. Thanks. I just didn't know if it was just me. Anyway, so the modern day council is made up of those family bands. And I was elected in 2010 as chief to work with state, local, and federal governments to act on behalf of our people. And a lot of people say, are you chief for life, or how does that work? And the answer is, if I can no longer do my duties, then I can step down at any time. Or if the council feels like I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do or carrying out what they wish, they can remove me at any time and put somebody else in. So there's no set election date. It's not like an elected position. It's just like you know, the citizens vote on you, and if they have confidence in you, and you stay there. Once they don't, then you leave gracefully, or they'll escort you out of it. Because as you know, you cannot. It's hard to lead somebody if you don't have the backing of the people, right? So with all of that, we are also, from a historic lesson perspective, this was, every time a European government comes to somewhere, they claim it for their own, right? I mean, we've been here for 11 or 12,000 years. So like France came over and claimed New England as New France. Whereas in Britain came over and across the other side of the lake, they declared that their territory, right? And the Dutch were around Lake George and claimed that area, right? Because they come up the Hudson and claimed Lake George. So we were allied with the French. And because the fur trade was so popular in Europe, whoever owned the trade routes, like whoever controlled Lake Champlain, the Rushlow River, or the Hudson, that determined basically European wealth, right? Because they were selling the fur to traders in Europe. So when the Iroquois tried to take over Lake Champlain and tried to engage on our lands, we went up to Quebec City and we asked for help because we're on the most southern territory of the Algonquin type people. And who was the governor at the time was Samuel de Champlain, was up in Quebec City. And we had a big council fire in a location called Kahnawake, which is a Iroquois tribe just about 18 miles south of Montreal. So we all got together because the Iroquois were coming and we asked Champlain for help. They agreed. So we brought him down the Rushlow River to Lake Champlain, where he discovered Bitabak, as we call it, the lake between us and our enemy. That's the Abenaki term for Lake Champlain, Bitabak, the lake between. And he came down to assess the situation. And then we met the Iroquois war party down around Crown Point. And we decided not to have a battle that day, but to do our ceremonies and meet them on a battlefield the following day. Because that's what we do. We do our ceremonies first if we can. In case we are killed, we know we're going to go to the other side. So anyway, there was this battle, and then Samuel de Champlain and two of his warriors shot some of the leaders of the Iroquois people during that battle, and they fled. So we won the first victory of the French and Indian Wars. But because they fled, the British were afraid that they weren't going to get any furs, that the French would take over the lake and then they wouldn't get any furs. So they joined the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. Whence how the French and Indian Wars happened. The reason I'm telling you this is because when that war started, there was a thing called the Wabanaki Confederacy, which is made up of the Passamaquoddies, Penobscots, Wolastoqs or Maliseet people, us, and the Mi'kmaq or the Mi'kmaq people. So they weren't directly involved in the war, but they were allied with the French. So they would send troops, but they weren't engaged completely. And that's called the Wabanaki Confederacy. Now, in conjunction with this, the people on the front lines of the war were the Seven Nations of Canada Confederacy, which included 3 Iroquois tribes, Algonquin, Huron, the Abenaki. And we were on the front lines because we were the ones closest to the Iroquois. If you ever watch the movie The Black Robe, if you ever get a chance, it's about the Huron almost being slaughtered by the Iroquois because the Jesuits taught them to turn the other cheek and they didn't fight, and the Iroquois almost wiped them out, the Wendat people. So that's a pretty good movie that gives you a historical context of the Black Robes. So that is the big picture. The Abenaki Nation also consists of 2 tribes in Canada, Odanak and Woolenak up on the St. Lawrence and the Troy River area. So that's kind of the Abenaki Nation as a whole. And then you have the tribes underneath it. And then you have non-affiliated tribes. And I tell people that the difference between Native people and every other culture is that we are unique in the fact that it's kind of shocking when I say this, but only dogs, horses, and Indians need a pedigree in this United States. We're the only race of people that cannot self-declare. So if I say I'm Indian, unless I'm a citizen of a recognized state or federally recognized tribe, I'm not really legally an Indian. Whereas in other races if you say you're Black or Asian or African American or anything else, you're automatically protected under affirmative action and other types of, non-discriminatory practices. If you say you're Indian, you have to prove your lineage, you have to prove your history, and you have to make sure that you are a citizen of a already recognized tribe. You can find our criteria that we had to follow if you go to Vermont State Statutes and you go to General Provisions 1, Chapter 23, it says Abenaki people, and it'll list all the criteria we had to meet in order to be a legal Indian tribe in the state of Vermont. And I use the eugenics survey to help prove that we never left, because the state always said we weren't here, we were from Canada. And I use the eugenics survey. If people know what the eugenics survey is, there was a 1931 Sterilization Act that the legislators enacted to purge any undesirable person that they thought, idiot, imbecile, people they didn't want breeding in the state of Vermont. They created this 1931 sterilization law, and the UVM, Henry Perkins, the zoology program, carried out this eugenics survey of finding Abenaki, French, retarded, as they called them back then, imbeciles, idiots, and you could be sterilized, so you couldn't procreate. And a lot of the people would be put in Brandon School for Boys or the Brandon's Training Center or St. Joe's Orphanage, or they would be put in Vermont Industrial Schools or Vermont State Prisons. So that's what you'll hear the hubbub you've seen in the paper about myself trying to get eugenics apology from the state of Vermont. We got one from UVM in 2019. I worked with Tom Sullivan to get that apology for carrying out the sterilization programs and the tracking, and the state's working on that now. It just passed the House and the Senate's got to take it up. So that's a dark history in Vermont. And I've been working, my grandmother was in that survey and changed her name. She had 3 names. She kept changing it every time they got close to her to try to sterilize her. She would change her name and move. So, that's all documented in the survey. So I use those records to help show that we never left. We were always here. So that's kind of the overarching lay of the land. Now, if you go to AbenakiTribe.org, that's our website, www.abenakitribe.org. We're doing a myriad of things. I used some of the land grants to get our hunting and fishing rights. We don't have as many rights as senior citizens do. They have full big game tags. We only get the combination hunting and fishing, but I'm working on the big game tags as well. But so I just achieved that last year. So we have our hunting and fishing rights. Now they're using, there was a bill passed that any state parks that are changing their signs now will include Abenaki names. So there'll be place names in English and in Abenaki, which is awesome. I have a huge food sovereignty program, which if you go onto our website, go to the More tab way over on the right-hand side and go to AHA, you'll see that I work with 3 colleges currently. That's Sterling College, UVM, Middlebury, and Bennington's coming on this year. and 15 growers from NOFA, Vermont, the Northeast Farming Organic Association. They were at 15 growers, now they're at 40 this year. So last year we produced over 700 pounds of squash, a few hundred pounds of beans, and probably had access to 500 to 1,000 pounds of corn to make cornmeal. And I would distribute those to our 3 food shelves, one in Holland, Vermont, which is way up on the Canadian border, out of my location in Shelburne. And also we have one in Coosuk, New Hampshire, for our southern people. We'll be opening one somewhere up near Littleton, Vermont. So that's growing all of our foods and distributing them to our citizens. Part of that food security program is getting access to our lands again. Even if we can't own them, we do have land, 65 acres in Barton, Vermont, that's tribally owned, the first tribal forest in 200 years, which I helped acquire in 2012. But if you go to our website under partnerships, you'll see all the land access that I've negotiated with the Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of the State Parks and Recs, the Agency of Natural Resources, and all of the individuals and companies to give us access for natural foods, medicines, and artistry work to allow us to go on the lands to gather those things. So that's our natural foods section. Then we have our grown section, and recently, within the last few months, I acquired a bison herd and also some steers to help feed with the meat production. So we have 16 head of bison currently that we're working with, and they're kind of majestic animals. So they're not like cows that you can walk up and lead them anywhere. They're pretty, they have a wild spirit. So anyway, so that kind of rounds out our food security programs. And we have Title VI, which is Indian education. We get funds from the Department of Ed that we run. We have 3 supervisory unions in the Northeast Kingdom that we run our kid programs out of. I can just go on and on about the myriad of things. You can see some of those from our website, and we don't have any full-time staff, which is amazing that we've been able to build all this with no money, no staff, and just using the resources that we can and some ingenuity. And so we're doing our best, and I have a full-time job, and I do this on nights and weekends. My wife sometimes says, hey, what about me? You know, you're kind of so busy that what about me? So, which is understandable. I don't know if we want to start with any questions, Barb, so that way we're not, I'm just not talking at everybody.
I have
Yeah,
a
I think that's
question,
good.
Don. Could you, if I recall, you chose to be part of a vaccine trial in order to promote that your people not be concerned about getting the vaccine. Is that true? And how did that go?
Yeah, that's correct. I was actually the first person in the state of Vermont to actually receive a vaccine. At the time, I didn't know it. Back in November 8th, I received my first shot of the AstraZeneca trials. The reason that's important is because if you've seen the statistics, I think Black, Indigenous people of color are at about 20% vaccination rate. Well, I think Europeans are normal, everyday white Europeans, I think are at 30 some odd %. And there's been a disparity there because I mentioned the 1931 Sterilization Act, and that the last person sterilized was 1975. Okay, at either the Brandon School or the Waterbury State Hospital that they were at. That was Abenaki. My grandmother was in that survey and died in the 90s, like 94, right? I remember my grandmother pretty well. So she didn't really want to talk about it, didn't trust medical people, kind of didn't want her daughter to be involved with medical people as much as possible. So we're kind of the first generation kind of removed from that. I mean, I remember my grandmother. So there's a lot of fear out there against UVM and the medical profession, right? Because you don't want to be on a list, right? You know, if you're on a list, then you're in trouble. But I'm trying to say we have to move past that for our own health and welfare. So by me getting the shot, if I got sick, they could make a decision. If I was healthy, then maybe they wouldn't fear it and get the shot. The problem we run into is that AstraZeneca, even though I'm in a 2-year trial, has not been approved yet, but the other vaccines have. So I'm not sure if there's still a lot of hesitation out there because the trial that I'm in is not what they're giving, or if it's just the fact that they're just nervous about getting it, so they're waiting to see what happens. So there is a disparity rate of vaccination, but also that Native people have a 3.5 times greater risk of catching COVID because we have diabetes and chronic diseases that are rampant, and which puts us at higher risk. So yes, I worked with the head of the hospital and that whole team to do that trial. I'm still in it. I was offered one through the VA, so I had to find out whether I had an actual shot or not. So I had to unblind and found out I actually did. I was fully vaccinated as of December 9th. So I did receive the actual vaccine. Yeah, the VA, like I said, was offering a shot. I had to turn it down because they don't know the effects of having 2 types of shots. So I said, well, as long as I'm covered from imminent death or hospitalization, I'm okay, right? I mean, I don't need 2 shots. So yeah, thanks for asking. There's a whole bunch of things that we work on. So that's just one of them from the medical. I was also part of the state of Vermont health assessment process to find out our overall health, and also the state of Vermont health improvement plan. So I'm it's just to give you a sense, one day I could be working on somebody's house burning down and they need food and clothes, to somebody's taking my child and I need help, to the governor calling me and asking me to do something. Or I also serve on the Attorney General of Racial Disparities. So the AG, the Attorney General, will call me and say, hey, I just had a conversation with the CEO of the hospital of Brumstead yesterday on different health issues. So, or I could be called by another nation, like the Wampanoag or the Mi'kmaq, or somebody calling me saying, hey, we have to talk about regional issues with Native people. So it's like being a mayor of a small city. And I can get everything from, hey, my grandmother's an Indian princess, to, hey, we need to talk about this effect on our people. So it's kind of an interesting, complicated, exhausting kind of lifestyle. I mean, other than my normal work as director of IT. But it is rewarding. I've got 3 honorary degrees from 3 different colleges. I'm a trustee of a college. I'm also on the Nature Conservancy Board. So there's a lot of dynamics.
And you're a ballroom dancer.
I am. Somebody told me one time that, look, you're a director of IT, you're a military vet, you're an Indian, and you ballroom dance. None of that stuff goes together. What the hell's wrong with you? And I'm like, well, I had to learn how to dance if I wanted to hang out with my wife, right? Or Barb's, sister-in-law. It's like that was the only way I was getting in on that deal, because it was like, I was like, oh, you mean not the club dance stuff, No. And actually, not too bad, right, Barb? At our wedding, we did pretty good dance. So,
right.
Yeah, you guys got some more questions?
Sure. I'll start with one, then I'll take them from the rest. So first of all, Chief Stevens, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Certainly appreciate that. And my 2 questions are: what are the biggest concerns now with your tribe members, and is there still tribal law that we hear about so often from different nations that we have in the country?
Yeah, I think the health concerns right now, the immediate issue is COVID, right? Our people, because every time an elder dies, you lose a lot of knowledge. See, in our culture, our elders have been on this earth longer than we have, so they inherently should know more than we do. So we respect our elders, we listen to them, and they used to be the people who would take care of our children while we would work, right? Like we had to go out and provide for the family, and it gave them a purpose, but also they had the knowledge to teach our children. Every time we lose one, we lose a lot of cultural knowledge. And not only that, is that now that they've been shut in and cut off from the community, there's a lot of depression because a lot of them are widowers, they live alone, they don't have that social, they don't know how to use technology to stay connected with each other. So that's been really tough. I think education about our people, so we're accepted still. I mean, there's still a lot of hate out there, right? You know, with hate blogs saying you're fake, white race shifters, wannabes. I'm like, we had to prove ourselves that nobody else ever had to do, where a European government had to go through our genealogy and history to prove ourselves. If we haven't done it, then hell with it, hell with people, right? I mean, we proved ourselves, we are who we are, and we're in statute as actual Indians in federal law, right? So
Okay.
Those are the things that I worry about. As it comes to tribal sovereignty, we have some autonomy in being able to determine our citizenship and how we govern our citizens. However, because we are a state tribe and not a federal tribe, the state who recognizes Vermont wrote in their bills that we don't have any other privileges that normal citizens have outside of our culture. So in other words, we cannot do jurisdictional law. Like we couldn't take something from a criminal court and bring it to our tribal courts. Now we can operate within our own to say this is what we do within our people, but it doesn't hold the weight of actual criminal prosecution and incarceration, that kind of stuff. So that stuff has not been afforded to us by the state of Vermont. That's one thing they restricted out of our recognition, the same as casinos or land claim. Like by recognizing us, they didn't want to give us any claim to land. So even though we had our treaties to show that that's how I got our hunting and fishing rights, that we never gave up that right, they don't honor those things because they're the ones who recognize us. That makes sense. That's how we're put in different classes, right? Federal, state, or not at all. They create a discrimination within the classes of people, like somehow somebody has different rights than somebody else. And I actually sued the Department of Interior and won a federal lawsuit to carry eagle feathers that were only provided to state tribes or federal tribes, but now we're one of the tribes, only of 2 in the country, I think, that are allowed to carry eagle feathers and go to the National Eagle Repository. But anyway, I think Frank has his hand up.
Yep. Go ahead, Frank.
I'm interested in how you preserve the integrity of your language. So many of the Europeans that have moved here within a generation or two, they can't speak Italian, Spanish, and so on. How do you preserve the integrity of your speaking language?
Well, great question, because when I became involved in Native culture in a serious manner, there was 10 fluent speakers in the world of our language that I knew of, and most of them were in Canada, because there's a reservation up there. But they were dying. So one of our Nulhegan citizens, who was young at the time, made it a point to live with one of the elders and learn our language. And then his children, the first 5 years of their life, all they spoke was Abenaki. They didn't speak English. So when they were getting ready to go to school, he had to teach them English. So not only did we learn specifically from the elders that still spoke it, but also all of the great thing about French is that they documented everything. The Jesuits, they documented our language, they documented how it was used. The only thing they couldn't really document is the context of it, right? Like, you know, because like a chair would be a wooden thing you sit upon, right? There's a context around the word, right? Like Nulhegan, place of the wooden traps or the deadfall traps, right? They could capture that, but they couldn't really capture the underlying like nuance of it, which those elders gave us, right? Like they gave us those. So I worked with Middlebury College. Last year was the first year that they actually agreed to create curriculum around preserving our language. So it was the first, and they have a huge international language program that they're experts on. It's really well known. So there's an Abenaki course now that they're providing to our citizens for free, and other people who want to learn it, they're charging them to learn it. So we had 20 people go through there, and probably we have a couple that are more fluent now than they were. So we're probably up to about 15 people to 20 people that are actually speaking it very well, and they have that context. And that person I told you about is the director of Indian language courses. So we are now also teaching Penobscot some of their language, because see, we're sisters and brothers. They're Eastern Abenaki, we're Western. So like if I say to you, Willawani, that means thank you. They say Ulioni, but it's the same. It's like potato, right? It's a dialect, but it's the same. If I say Kway, like we spell it Kwai, and the Willisticooks spell it Qey, right? So but it's still pronounced Kway. So we have references, and we also I got a 50 CD set from wax cylinders from Dartmouth College, because Dartmouth was founded on educating Native people, our people, because that's our territory. So I got a hold of a 50 CD set where Joseph Laurent back in the 1800s actually went through all of the English words and put context to them and pronounced it. The problem is if you didn't speak French, because he was French, he came from the Canadian Reserve. So where Abenaki and French pick up and where it leaves off, it's kind of, unless you know French, it's kind of tough. So great question. We're preserving our language. We're moving it forward, and more people are doing it. If you go to westernabenakiradio.com, or if you look up Western Abenaki language, you'll find places where you can actually learn it. And there's actually how to pronunciate things. It's a great resource.
Anyone else have a question?
I have a question, Kevin.
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Good afternoon, Chief Stevens. My name is Kim, and I have a cabin in the Northeast Kingdom. So I am very familiar with the Nulhegan Basin, but I guess I'm a little confused with the Nulhegan Basin and the Silvio Conte. How do those relate?
Yeah, the Silvio Conte is, I think, 32,000 acres. That goes along the Connecticut River. Nulhegan Basin is a section within the Silvio Conte. So they're both part of the same reserve, but the basin is specific to the Nulhegan Basin area, which is a smaller area. So they call it the same, but it's like a area within an area. So the Silvio Conte is a huge swath of land, and the Nulhegan Basin is within that Silvio Conte area, which is more segregated to that section. Does that help you?
Yes.
Okay.
And I can also tell my fellow Rotarians that there's a beautiful welcome center up there. That
yes,
a foliage drive would be beautiful. I don't think it's open right now, but maybe by the fall would be a great place to stop.
If you ever get a chance to go up there, just make sure to set your GPS first, because and leave it on. Because if you go up to the Nulhegan Basin and you go up to Lewis Pond, it's beautiful. There's a lot of big roads, but it's 12 miles from the main road up to Lewis Pond. And there's a lot of old class 4 roads that weave in and out of that place. So if you happen to get lost, there's no cell service. You're not you're going to try to find your way out. And it's very interesting, because you won't meet anybody else, because there's only a few cabins on a few roads, but most of the place is wild.
Yep.
And I mean, if you want wild Vermont, that's where you're going. You could be going up over power lines, or if you've ever gone up old Stone Dam Road, and you hang a right at the first one, you go up over the power lines and you come out way up. Yeah, it's very wild. It's beautiful, but I would recommend it. Just take some precautions, stop at the welcome center, get a map, because if you get turned around, you might be driving around for a while. And if you run out of gas, there ain't nobody coming around anytime soon. You have to kind of plan ahead.
Okay, we have Brett and then Tom. Brett, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. Chief Richardson, are you offended by schools or any other organization using Native American names as mascots?
Am I offended? I
Yeah.
really don't pay it any mind, because the reason I say that is whether a school has a mascot or not has no bearing on my people. Like, if they have a name or they don't, how does that affect the daily lives of my people? It doesn't, right? That was created by a European, and only a European can take it away. So do I like it? Is it probably right? No, because a mascot lumps 500 nations into one image, one stereotypical image of an Indian with a headdress on, which we didn't have big headdresses. Could you imagine running through Mount Holly with a headdress on and trying to keep it on your head, right? Probably not going to happen, right? So we didn't have that stereotype of big headdresses. We had, like, if you see pictures of me, I'll have a moose head headdress and the feathers are down, right? And it's like all these stereotypes, like natives peeking over a rock. You think you have big feathers coming up and people aren't going to see that and know where you are? I mean, come on. But my point being is that it's always, to me, it's always improper when someone of a different culture uses something that belongs to somebody else, right? And it's kind of misappropriation. So, I mean, there could be Rutland Raiders all day long. There's many Raiders, English Raiders, all kinds of Raiders, right? But if once you start moving it to a connotation of a native person, then it kind of becomes wrong. And I tell people that we've been dehumanized for so long and called river rats, gypsies, anything less than human, that it's hard. And people don't believe me when I say that. And I said, okay, let me prove it to you. If you see the Cleveland Indians or the Atlanta Braves, you look in the stands before COVID, they had big headdresses on, people had war paint and red face and doing tomahawk chops and all that stuff. And that's totally acceptable, right? And if you say something, then you're just sensitive. They're trying to really be honoring the native people, right? But I said, okay, well, let's switch that conversation, but use the same example. Could you imagine if somebody comes in African regalia, painted their face black and stood in the stands? How do you think that would go? Same concept, right? Whether you paint your face black or red, same thing, or whether you have native garb or you have African garb, but people treat it two different ways. If they saw somebody show up like that, they go, oh my God. You know, but if native people, you're just sensitive. And it's because people romanticize about native people from the sideshows, the old Westerns, that the old cowboys saved the day from the damsel in distress, from this native person that's wild and going down in a blaze of glory, right? You know, he's going to die in a blaze of glory, right? Just some wild fantasy. So I'm saying is that we are just like everyone else. We have a different language, a different culture, and different traditions. So why I prefer schools that, if they're not a native school, they use their own imagery that represents them, not representing us, right? So, and there's only a few in Vermont, so I don't get all bent out of shape, because it's, like I said, if they change their name from Ravens or from Indians, it really doesn't affect the day-to-day life. I would rather they educate about why it's wrong, or why it misrepresents who we are. You know, because the schools, there's no requirement in schools to teach about us, which is sad, because they'll teach about Thanksgiving and Trail of Tears and everything, but not the local people who could have Abenaki sitting right next to them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's kind
so
of
running a little long, so we're going to take one last question from Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
I get long-winded, so sorry, Kevin.
I'm enthralled of your presentation, Chief Stevens, part of because I have a little bit of background. So I wanted to know, French do something different. They have what's called a métis status, or first people. If you can prove that you are part French and Indian, or Native American by name. And as it turns out, one of my ancestors was a cabin boy on one of those Champlain ships named Jacques Hertel, who married a Canajoharie Mohawk of the Turtle Clan, and or didn't marry her, had fathered 2 children in about 1620. What relation am I being able to trace a little bit back to the Canajoharie Mohawks to the Abenaki, number one, and number two, can you, if you cross the border, immediately obtain meta status in Canada?
The answer to the last question is no. We don't recognize state and federal borders, right? From historical homelands, like our homelands went up into Canada. However, and we used to be able to cross back and forth freely under the Jay Treaty, right? Like when the U.S. and Canada decided to separate the lines, or I should say Great Britain and Canada decided to create the Canadian border. The Jay Treaty allowed us to freely move back and forth without a problem. But then when 9/11 happened, they created this thing called the Patriot Act, which doesn't allow us to move without a authorized identifiable ID, which was really a passport or an enhanced driver. It really circumvented our tribal ID cards. So they didn't work anymore and they wouldn't let us through. That's from a travel standpoint. From a recognition, Canada has a recognition process that they apply individuals, not tribe. Individuals apply to the government for Indian status on an individual basis, right? And then collectively, those Indians may make up a tribe, right? Down here in the United States, actually they recognize tribes and then the tribes determine their citizenship, right? So the problem that we run into is that we were also not only genetic, but we were societal. French integrated with us, right? Just like one of the chiefs up in Odanak was a white chief. He was taken as a captive at 8 years old. He was brought into the tribe. He grew up around the tribe. They accepted him in as a tribe and he became the white chief or the chief at one point. So it was really about societal, cultural, but also you had to have lineage. So the way we do things here, you have to show that you are descendant of an Abenaki person, and that person has to be documented as an Abenaki person. But we still let people into our tribe. Like my wife, she's Portuguese, half Portuguese, right? She is still a citizen of our tribe because she's married to me. Because it'd be awful to have my kids and me sitting in enjoying our tribal meetings and her sitting out on the curb because she's not welcome. We didn't do that. And the French, and they're married with us, so they were part of our society, right? But even whether they're Indian or not, they were part of, where the British segregated themselves from the Iroquois people. Like they didn't try to do anything except use them as a tool of war. So where the French actually tried to learn from us and try to integrate. And even some of the Abenakis married to a Mohawk person, and they actually, the women lost status if they married a Frenchman, Indian status in Canada. And then they finally got those rights back because as soon as they married a Frenchman, they lost their status. But if a French woman married an Indian person, then she still had status. It's kind of crazy. So that's the European governments imposing their will on how they determine who is who, right? That's the problem, where no other culture has to do that. That's inherently the problem of not being able to self-declare who you are. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's
very well. Thank you.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again very much. It was a great presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you. And I'll say in our language, since you don't hear it very much, if you know how to say audio, like kwe means hi. Kwe. I should have said kwe Tony Parakomzi, which means hello, how are you? If I say audio, right, that means goodbye. And then if I say audio nana walmazi oli bamkani, that means audio, goodbye. Nana walmazi, take good care until I see you again. And oli bamkani means really means paddle well, but in our language now, since we're not paddling canoes, we're saying travel well. So audio nana walmazi oli bamkani means goodbye, take care until I see you again, and travel well. Whereas, and what I should have said when I first came in is kwe Tony Panakwonzi means hello, how are you, basically. So anyway.
Audio.
Audio.
Hey, you learned your first Abenaki word, audio.
Audio. Thank you, John.
Thank you again.
Nice seeing you, Barb. Nice
Bye-bye.
seeing you all. If you ever have any questions, I'm always here. You know how to get a hold of me through Barb at least, right?
There you go.
Thank you.
Please
All right.
look at our website. Please look at
Okay.
AbenakiTribe.org. You'll find a lot of
And-
information. I've done a lot of videos there. I've done a lot of
And-
lectures. You'll find a lot of information if you take the time to really go through it.
And again, the movie you recommended was Black Robes.
Black Robe is a movie about the Jesuits Christianizing the Huron and how the Iroquois slaughtered them because they were taught to turn the other cheek. And that was the Seven Nations of Canada Confederacy that I'm talking about, where they just did it on that Huron thing, but they were all part of the same time period. There's also things that I have on the website are the Abenaki recognition in Vermont. It's called Wabanakik. You'll see the movie there. It was done by Bear Paw Productions, about 20 minutes about the Abenaki experience. So that's really good. And the Navy, how we look at water. So, and there's racial discussions too, and ethnobotany. So there's a lot of videos on our site, a lot of information, a lot of history. So, all right.
Thank you. Audio.
Adios. Nana Wamazi.